14 years before the Titanic sank, a struggling author published a novel about a massive unsinkable ship that hit an iceberg in the North Atlantic and went down with most of its passengers still on board. The fictional ship in that book was called the Titan. The real ship, built years later, was called the Titanic. Both ships were described as unsinkable, both hit an iceberg on the North Atlantic route, both sank in April. We're going to unpack exactly how close those two stories really are at the very end of this video, and it's stranger than you think. But first, I want to show you 9 other real, documented coincidences that are so statistically unlikely, experts still argue about how they could possibly happen. Every single story in this video is real, documented, and verifiable. Nothing here is an urban legend. Stick around for the Titanic story, because the full details are even more unsettling than what I just told you. If stories like this genuinely mess with your head, subscribe now, because we dig into something like this every single week. Let's get into it. Number 9. In 1979, twin brothers who had been separated at birth and adopted by different families met for the first time as adults, and what they discovered about each other's lives left researchers stunned. Both men had been named James by their adoptive parents, without either family knowing the other existed. Both had married a woman named Linda, divorced her, and then married a second woman named Betty. Both named their first sons James Allen, both owned dogs named Toy, and both drove the exact same model of car. Both worked part-time as sheriff's deputies, both vacationed at the exact same beach in Florida, and both suffered from severe migraine headaches starting at the exact same age. Researchers at the University of Minnesota studied this case as part of a larger twin study, trying to understand how much of this could be genetics and how much was simply coincidence. The official conclusion was that genetics likely explained the personality similarities, but nobody could fully account for the specific names, the specific dog, or the specific beach. This case remains one of the most cited examples in psychology of just how strange identical genetics raised in completely different environments can turn out to be. Two men, raised hundreds of kilometers apart by strangers, somehow built nearly identical lives without ever knowing the other one existed. Number 8. A woman named Violet Jessop worked as a stewardess on 3 different ocean liners built by the same company, and she survived a disaster on every single one of them. In 1911, she was aboard the Olympic when it collided with a British warship, causing serious damage but no fatalities. The following year, she was working aboard the Titanic when it struck an iceberg and sank, and she survived by being placed into a lifeboat. Then in 1916, she was working as a nurse aboard the Britannic, the third sister ship, when it struck a mine and sank in the Aegean Sea. She reportedly suffered a serious head injury during this final sinking, but survived by jumping from the ship and swimming clear of the wreckage before it went under. 3 sister ships, all built by the same shipping line, all struck by disaster, and the same woman working aboard every single one when it happened. She lived a long life afterward and reportedly never fully explained why she kept choosing to go back to sea after everything she survived. Number 7. A park ranger named Roy Sullivan was struck by lightning on 7 separate occasions throughout his life, and he survived every single strike. The odds of being struck by lightning even once in an average lifetime are roughly 1 in 15,000. Being struck 7 times, according to some statisticians, is so mathematically unlikely that the actual odds are difficult to even meaningfully calculate. His colleagues nicknamed him the human lightning rod, and reportedly some co-workers refused to stand near him during storms out of genuine fear. Each strike left him with real, serious injuries, including burns, hair loss, and permanent nerve damage, so this was never something he found funny or lucky. Scientists studying his case looked at everything from his job outdoors to possible metal in his clothing, but never found a definitive reason he was targeted so many times. He eventually died of unrelated causes, having outlived what should have statistically been an impossible number of encounters with the sky itself. We're 3 stories in, and honestly, the ones coming up get even harder to believe. If you're already hooked, go ahead and subscribe right now. Let's keep going. Number 6. In 1942, a ship's steward named Poon Lim survived at sea alone on a small wooden raft for 133 days after his ship was torpedoed. This remains the longest confirmed solo survival at sea in recorded history, and to this day no one has officially matched it. He built a fishing hook out of wire from a flashlight, caught rainwater in a canvas bag, and even managed to catch and store a passing shark for food. He was spotted several times by passing ships and even by a German submarine, but was never picked up, either ignored or deliberately left behind. When he was finally rescued by fishermen off the coast of Brazil, he had lost significant weight but was reportedly able to walk unassisted onto the boat that saved him. The British Royal Navy was so impressed by his survival skills that they reportedly incorporated parts of his story into official survival training manuals. Number 5. Actor Anthony Hopkins was preparing for a film role and desperately needed a specific novel, but couldn't find a single copy anywhere in London. While sitting on a bench at a London subway station, waiting for his train, he noticed a discarded book lying abandoned on the seat beside him. It was the exact novel he had been searching for across the entire city, complete with the author's own handwritten notes in the margins. When he later met the author of the novel, he mentioned the strange discovery, and the author revealed he had lost his own personal annotated copy of the book years earlier in that exact same city. Out of every discarded object on every bench in every station across an entire major city, the exact missing copy ended up directly beside the one person searching for it. Even the author himself later admitted he genuinely had no explanation for how the odds worked out that way. Number 4. In 12th century England, according to multiple historical chroniclers writing at the time, two children with distinctly green-tinted skin appeared in a village, speaking a language nobody recognized. The children reportedly refused all food offered to them at first, and only agreed to eat raw green beans, which they seemed to genuinely recognize. Over time, as their diet changed, their skin gradually lost the green tint, and the boy reportedly became ill and died shortly after. The surviving girl eventually learned to speak English and reportedly described coming from a place with no sunlight, only a constant twilight, located across a river or body of water. Historians have proposed several theories, from Flemish immigrant orphans suffering from severe nutritional deficiency to simple medieval folklore that grew more elaborate with each retelling. What makes this case unusual is that it was recorded independently by at least a separate chroniclers of the period, which is unusually strong documentation for a medieval story. Nearly 900 years later, historians still genuinely debate what actually happened in that small English village. Number 3. A woman in Sweden bought a second-hand typewriter at a flea market and, while cleaning it, discovered a name scratched faintly into the metal casing underneath. Out of curiosity, she searched the name online and discovered it belonged to a soldier who had died decades earlier in a foreign war, thousands of kilometers from where she now lived. She reached out to a local historical society, and after some research, they connected her with a distant surviving relative of the soldier who still lived in the same country. That relative had been searching for years for any surviving personal item that had belonged to the soldier, since almost everything had been lost or destroyed during the conflict. The typewriter was eventually returned to the soldier's family, closing a gap in their family history that had remained empty for over 70 years. A single scratched name on a forgotten machine, sold and resold across decades, somehow ended up back in the hands of the one family who actually needed it. Number 2. This one is more recent and slightly lighter, but the odds behind it are still genuinely bizarre. A library book was checked out and not returned for over 60 years. When a family finally found it while cleaning out a relative's estate and returned it, the library discovered the exact same book had been checked out under an almost identical name decades apart, at two completely different branches. The librarian who processed the return said in an interview that in over 20 years of working there, she had never seen anything like it and genuinely couldn't explain the naming overlap. Genealogists later confirmed the two people were not related at all, just two unconnected families with a coincidentally overlapping name pattern, decades and towns apart. The book itself was quietly returned to circulation, and the library reportedly kept a small note about the incident tucked inside the front cover for future staff to find. And now, number 1, let's finally go back to that novel written 14 years before the Titanic ever sailed. The book, written by Morgan Robertson in 1898, described a ship nearly identical in length to the real Titanic, built years later. Both ships were described as having roughly the same number of lifeboats, far fewer than the number of passengers they were actually capable of carrying. In the novel, the ship struck an iceberg on the starboard side during an April crossing of the North Atlantic and sank, with most passengers dying from lack of lifeboats rather than the collision itself. When the real Titanic sank in 1912, it struck an iceberg on the starboard side during an April crossing of the North Atlantic, and the overwhelming majority of deaths were caused by insufficient lifeboats. Robertson later insisted he had simply used his own knowledge of shipbuilding to imagine a realistic worst-case scenario and had no supernatural insight into the future whatsoever. Maritime historians largely agree with him, pointing out that shipbuilders of that era were already discussing exactly these kinds of risks, which made the scenario genuinely predictable to anyone paying close attention. Even with a completely rational explanation available, the sheer number of matching details, the name, the size, the season, the site of impact, the lifeboat shortage, remains genuinely startling to read side by side. A struggling author, writing purely from imagination 14 years earlier, described the deadliest maritime disaster of the century in almost exact detail, and to this day, people still find that unsettling. 10 coincidences, twin brothers who built nearly identical lives without ever meeting. A stewardess who survived disaster on 3 different sinking ships. A man who survived being struck by lightning 7 separate times. A survivor who spent 133 days alone at sea and lived to tell about it. An actor who found the exact lost book he needed, abandoned on a random subway bench. To mysterious green children whose true origin is still debated nearly 9 centuries later. A typewriter that traveled decades and countries before landing back in the right hands. A library book that connected to unrelated strangers across 60 years in 2 different branches. And a novel that described the Titanic disaster in startling detail, 14 years before it actually happened. 10 real, documented, verifiable stories, and every single one of them makes you wonder just how much of life is actually random. Statisticians actually have an explanation for why coincidences like these happen more often than we expect, and it's honestly almost as interesting as the stories themselves. It's called the law of truly large numbers. With billions of people alive, having billions of interactions every single day, statistically bizarre events are actually guaranteed to happen somewhere, to someone, constantly. In other words, the truly strange thing wouldn't be these coincidences happening. The truly strange thing would be if, across all of human history, absolutely nothing this unlikely ever happened at all. That doesn't make these stories any less fascinating. It just means the universe is bigger, busier, and stranger than our instincts are built to understand. If any of these 10 stories genuinely surprised you, subscribe now, because next week we're covering 10 more, and I promise the last one on that list is even harder to explain away. Comment below and tell me which one of these 10 you genuinely didn't believe was real until you saw the details. See you next day, and keep an eye out, because apparently, statistically speaking, something this strange is probably happening near you right now too.